Well, welcome, Mark Mix from the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation for another episode of, or another update, if you will, on the actions of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation and the success that we have almost every day on behalf of workers across the country. And you may recall in our last segment, we talked about a really interesting story, and I'm using my finger quotes there because it was an absolute case study of union abuse and union power and how it works against the interests of individual employees. Well, the good news is we have a great finish to that story. And here with us today is Glenn Taubman, the lawyer who represented employees up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania at Latrobe Specialty Metals in a case against the United Steelworkers. Glenn, do you want to give us an update of what's happened? It's good news, so smile and be cheerful.
Sure. Thank you, Mark. So you may recall in the last segment we discussed this case in which employees voted twice against a contract that the Steelworkers was trying to cram down their throat, of course, a forced dues contract. And what happened there was, unbeknownst to the employees, the Steelworkers secretly signed the contract, even though they told these employees that they would have a vote. And when the employees voted down the contract a second time, the Steelworkers said, oh, by the way, that vote was a meaningless sham, and we've signed the contract and you're stuck with it. We had a decertification petition that was pending. They tried to block that. We went to a hearing in October that took 2 days, and the result of that was the election, our decertification election, was allowed to go forward. The employees, needless to say, voted out the Steelworkers, but that didn't end the case. The Steelworkers then filed objections and unfair labor practices, all to try to stay in power and keep collecting forced dues. Well, finally, after a total of 6 months of litigation, the Steelworkers dropped their unfair labor practices and their objections, and the result of the election was certified. So it took the National Right to Work and 6 months of litigation to overcome every union block and bar and underhanded effort to lock these people in. So it's really a great victory for us.
Well, it is, Glenn, and interestingly enough, you know, those victories come quite often when our attorneys take on these cases. The only thing we have to do is know about them, and when employees are informed and they call us and ask for help, the foundation attorneys are there to help, and this is a great example of that. You know, union officials claim they're the most democratic institution in America. You hear that again and again and again. And there is no better case study, as I mentioned at the outset, than this case with the United Steelworkers, when they basically tried to impose a contract that had been voted down twice by the workers they claim to represent. So, great victory there, Glenn, but there's always more work to do. And believe it or not, the Biden administration is pushing extremely hard to give union officials even more power over workers, and they're doing that in the form of rulemaking at the National Labor Relations Board. Glenn, we just filed comments last week, I believe it was, on a rule proposal by the National Labor Relations Board that will give union officials, that will restore significant powers to union officials and actually expand their power over workers in several areas where we've been busy over the last several years and had some very big success. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure, Mark. So, in fact, during the prior administration, the Trump NLRB, we were hugely successful in rewriting a lot of these regulations to make it easier for workers to choose, to make it easier for them to decertify a union that was unpopular in the workplace. And we were quite successful in all of that. And the Latrobe case that we were just talking about is an example of that, a successful decertification for workers who want out. So here's the Biden board, the most union-friendly president in the history of the country, so he says. And so one of the first things they're doing is to repeal the rules that we had worked for and won previously under the prior board, which made it easier for workers to decertify. And literally, they're coming in and saying, our new rule is to revoke the old rule. It's not trying to improve anything, not trying to create any new framework. It's like whatever was done under the old administration, we're here to revoke. And what that actually means for workers is union blocking charges, NLRB bars, all kinds of policies that make it difficult for employees to decertify, that make something that should take 1 month take up to 3 years, and all to entrench union bosses collecting forced dues. That's one of the main changes that they're trying to make. The other one in this new rule or procedure is to make it easier for unions to have card checks. In other words, to get into a workplace without a secret ballot election. So look at it from the 30,000-foot level. The Biden NLRB wants to get unions in by card checks, no secret ballot elections, and then make it difficult or impossible for the employees to ever get out. So that's the regime that we're living in and what we're fighting.
Yeah. Well, Glenn, let me just kind of, decertification means workers are interested in throwing the union out of their workplace. And that's primarily, it's really very difficult, unfortunately, even under relaxed rules under the previous NLRB. But it's going to be even tougher now. And Joe Biden's desire is to make sure that once you get in, you can't get out. And so the card check fight is this idea where union officials go to your front door at night, and 2 or 3 of them perhaps, and say, sign this little card, this 3x5 card, and says you're interested in the union, or you're interested in higher pay, or you're interested in better benefits. And once you sign that card, that's tantamount to a vote for union certification. It's very difficult to get that back, almost impossible. And if the union can produce a simple majority of those cards, then under the Biden regime and under the premise of where this NLRB wants to go, an employer will be forced to recognize the union. Tell us about the construction industry, too, Glenn. There's an interesting development in the construction industry, how a union can actually end up representing workers when not one single worker expressed an interest in being in a union.
Right. This is actually the third piece of the rules that we were talking about. The first piece is about the blocking charge rules to prevent decertifications. The second piece is about card checks. And the third piece, as Mark has mentioned, is about the construction industry. So there's an interesting quirk in the construction industry where, because jobs are theoretically very short-term, Congress put in a section called 8F, which means an employer can recognize a union without any proof that anybody wants the union. Okay, so in effect, the employer and the union can kind of collude and have a union. The safeguard was that employees could get rid of that union at any time under this 8F provision. But now what they want to do is make it easier for unions and employers to convert that 8F relationship into what's called a 9A relationship, meaning a full perpetual collective bargaining relationship. So the Biden board is trying to say, well, if you came in through this 8F arrangement, even though there was no proof that anybody wanted the union, you can easily convert that into a full perpetual collective bargaining relationship without any additional proof. So employees are completely cut out of this process, and they could end up in a situation where they have the union, they can't get rid of the union, and at no point during this process was there ever any affirmative showing that anybody wanted the union. Not even by a card check. Forget about a secret ballot election. Not even by a card check would be necessary under this 8F scheme.
Yeah. Well, needless to say, there's no employee rights that are being promoted here. There are certainly union official rights to expand their force union power. And that's what the Foundation's work's all about, representing employees and protecting them from this compulsory unionism abuse. The work never ends, as you might guess, as the Biden administration and the agencies that he's nominated leaders of are continually to try to expand. And that's why the Foundation's work is so important. From Latrobe Specialty Metals in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to the Supreme Court of the United States, the Foundation's been protecting workers' rights since 1968 and working to expand those rights. We'll continue to do that, and the only way we can do that is thankfully because of the support of members like you and supporters like you that help us fund this work so we can represent these employees and provide free legal services. We thank you for that. We're grateful for it, and we'll come back with more good news maybe next month, maybe tomorrow. Thanks for your help, and thanks for listening in.